Hello and welcome again to another What's a Geek tech review. The first thing we'll notice about the Y530 laptop is that even for a 15.6-inch gaming laptop, it's got a much smaller footprint than laptops of its similar screen size. For example, you'll notice that the bezels are very thin on three sides, and the keyboard is really compressed, and it goes all the way to the edges of the laptop. Now, this does make for some interesting consequences. For example, the keyboard is pretty weird in its layout. The numpad is really compressed over the directional arrow keys. And we also have a screen recording and the print screen button moved all the way down here, which I presume is for those people who want to record their gameplay, whether in screenshots or in video. Now, a point of contention I have with this design is that the touchpad is really narrow, and well, it's got a good amount of width here, but the height is not that good at all. It'll take a while to actually get it up and down the rest of the screen. But what I do appreciate about the touchpad here is that it's got these two separate physical buttons here that are really nice, and they have this really satisfying sound to them, which might be a problem if you're like playing video games and communicating with your team over Discord or something, and they can hear all this clicking, but then again, who's going to be using the touchpad to play like online multiplayer games anyway? I mean, that's not what it's for. I hope not, at least. It also has keyboard backlighting, which I like, and also this is an IPS display, so no matter what the screen angle is, the colors remain the same. Of course, with IPS, you sacrifice a little bit of contrast, but you make up for it with superior color quality, which I think a lot of people would appreciate more today. Although, now that I say that, I'm not super impressed with the color quality of the Y530 screen, but I am impressed, however, with the brightness and the contrast, even if it's an IPS screen. Moving on to the build quality, we noticed that the Y530 has this really nice, interesting finish filled with concentric circles, reminiscent somewhat of a vinyl record. I'm not sure if you could describe it that way, but it's made of really hard plastic. The hinge has this really satisfying sturdiness to it. It doesn't move around much, even if you move the laptop a bit. And also, you'll notice that the chassis extends way past the display here. So even if the screen is over here, where you normally find it in a 14-inch laptop, the rest of the chassis extends to still give it the footprint of a small, albeit quite a small, 15.6-inch laptop. On top of that, the rest of the build, the chassis, is also made of hard plastic, but it's got a great finish here. It's not exactly a fingerprint magnet, although I do see some fingerprints left over from my hand here. They're not very noticeable thanks to the black paint. Overall, it feels very solid, and also the laptop is 2.3 kilograms, which is a very satisfying weight for a 15.6-inch laptop, because competitors will usually be in the range of 2.5 or 2.7 kilograms. But at 2.3, it is noticeably lighter, which will be much appreciated for people who like their gaming laptops available for on the go. I just want to talk about the design for a little bit. You see, this Lenovo Y530 here is almost professional looking despite being a gaming laptop. In fact, the only indication that it's a gaming laptop would probably be the design of the vents here, and of course the rather subdued placement of the Legion branding over here. Now, this comes in sharp contrast to what I would say is a very garish look for the Y520 Legion, Lenovo's previous series of gaming laptops, and a throwback to Lenovo's previous offerings in the IdeaPad series. Like, I would say one of my favorite laptops of all time is the Lenovo Y460, Y470 series from back in 2011 and 2012. And one thing I should note is that Lenovo hasn't always been very well known for their gaming laptops, their gaming devices. It's only recently that they've been making the push with the Legion brand, or the Y5 or Y50, Y70 brands. But prior to that, they actually did make really good gaming laptops, mid-range gaming laptops, with the aforementioned Y460, Y470 series. They had some pretty good graphics cards out there. Now let's talk about the connectivity options on the Y530. So let's start with the back. Now, at the back of the chassis is where most of the ports of the Y530 are situated. You'll notice that there is what this is called a Novo lock. It's one of Lenovo's proprietary locking things. It's like a Kensington lock, which I've never used before, so I can't really comment on it, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty good. One thing we'll note is that this over here is a power port, and it's proprietary. It's a square shape, definitely not USB Type-C. Then over here is a standard RJ45 Ethernet jack for wired LAN. This is an HDMI port. Over here is a USB 3.0 super speed port, standard size Type A. HDMI and HDMI 2.0, so you can output 4K 60 FPS if you want to play on an external screen. And over here is the very welcome addition of a USB Type-C port, which runs 3.1. Now, on either side of the Y530, you will also find standard USB 3.0 ports, and on the other side is another USB 3.0 port, currently occupied by our little portable SSD, which serves as our benchmark storage tool. Now let's talk about what everyone's really looking forward to. The specs. How does this thing run? Does it run games well? Are the thermals okay? Well, find out after the break. What break? There is no break. Let's go! So the Lenovo Y530 features the top-tier i7 8750H processor by Intel, and I'm very happy with the inclusion of this CPU. It's a 6-core, 12-thread CPU Coffee Lake architecture that represents some of the fastest performance you can get in a mobile device. And again, I'm very happy with this because many mid-range gaming laptops tend to include the lower-end quad-core i5-8300H, which is respectable, no doubt, but it's not much different from the Skylake i5-6300H, which has been around for almost 3 years. Also included is 8GB of RAM, which is a bit of a disappointment for me because many laptops at this price range have 16GB of RAM, which I think, personally, represents not the barest minimum, but the amount of RAM that you would like to have for the optimal gameplay experience. And I mean, at this price range, you should expect 16GB of RAM anyway. But let's call a little attention towards the SSD. The SSD's model number is a KBG30ZMT128G by Toshiba. And yes, it is indeed an M2 PCIe SSD, but if you take a look at the benchmarks here we have at Crystal Diskmark, the sequential speeds are not exactly what we'd hope for them to be. Now look at the read, you see 1251.5 megabytes per second on sequential read, and yeah, that's a pretty great figure. It's more than twice what you'd get from a SATA SSD. However, looking over to the right, it's only 355.1 megabytes per second. That's a bit of a disappointing figure for a PCIe SSD or a SATA SSD. And while right figures aren't super important for anything besides productivity, and definitely this 1.2 gigabyte per second read speed will be great for loading OS and games, it's just a little bit of a disappointment considering the other kinds of SSDs you get at this price range. For example, one of my favorite SSDs of all time in the PCIe space is the Samsung SM951, and that definitely, even that's a couple of years older, that definitely has a whole lot of performance behind it. Now, in terms of graphics, the Lenovo Y530 has a GeForce GTX 1050 Ti. Now, those of you who've been following the 10 series of NVIDIA will know that their notebook class cards are just around 10% weaker than their desktop counterparts, and that's a very impressive figure. It means that laptop video cards are more powerful than they've ever been, and that shows in many cases. I've seen 1060 Max-Q laptops, 1070 laptops with 144Hz displays, and they perform amazingly. But what about the 1050 series, which is more of a mid-range or low-end graphics segment? Well, at this price range, we would see some 1060 graphics cards in laptops, but the 1050 Ti isn't that much of a bad deal either. It also contributes to better laptop battery life, and better thermals as well, which is a very important part for longevity and for people who don't like hot air being blasted into their laps. That's how it is. Now, since we're talking about the graphics card and this is a gaming laptop, I suppose it should be no surprise to you viewers that we're actually going to do a couple of video game benchmark. I haven't been looking at the camera this whole time, have I? Some fourth wall breaking stuff. Sorry viewers, I'm not really used to this. Anyway, keeping that on. Anyway, so it should come as no surprise to you that we're going to be doing some benchmarks here, specifically Monster Hunter World. And well, let's talk about our benchmark methodology for a moment here. For Monster Hunter World, we'll be running the internal benchmark of the game at settings to be determined, probably medium, because that'll offer the best graphical performance and quality. So remember how we said that we were going to use Monster Hunter World's internal benchmarking tool? Well, it turns out there isn't any, and I was probably super mistaken. But anyway, we're gonna do a little gameplay run to show you how the laptop performs with Monster Hunter World. So here we are in our options menu, and as you can see, our graphics settings are set to manual, but actually what we did was we set it to mid settings, the mid preset, and then we went into advanced graphics settings and set the image quality to high, so the resolution stays at 1080p all throughout, rather than dynamically changing according to frame rate. And then we also turned volume rendering quality off, because this is a common piece of advice for improving performance and visual quality in Monster Hunter World. So this is what you'll be getting. This is the kind of performance you'll be getting with these settings on the Y530 Legion. And of course, our screen mode settings are full screen, so we don't lose any performance to borderless full screen, 1920 by 1080p resolution native on the panel, and VSync and frame limit off. So our method of testing the performance of the Y530 in Monster Hunter World is simply fighting the monster Barroth. And Barroth is, well, hard to kill, right? Sunboy, what do you think? Louder for your people in the back. Hey! That is Sunboy in the back, by the way, guys. Anyway, so Barroth is not that hard to kill once you got used to him. But anyway, he's a pretty good way of demonstrating the various effects in Monster Hunter World, because he definitely has a lot of like special attacks that throws up particles and graphics in the air, potentially ruining performance. But as you can see, even with all of these impressive effects on display, the game does not drop below 40 frames per second except in very specific circumstances. In fact, it hovers closer to the high 40s and low 50s, all while maintaining, I mean high 40s and low 50s is a pretty good way of playing the game, especially in Monster Hunter World, where it's not quite 60, but it will be enough for you to dodge all those animation frames where you might get killed in a single blow. So clearly Lenovo Y530 is handling the game pretty well, and at these settings you definitely will be able to play the game with appreciable image quality, but also not really bad performance. Alright, watch it. Watch that ending. Watch that ending. Oh my god, it's amazing! Okay, so let's take a look at the temperatures that we incurred while playing Monster Hunter. Oh my god! 98 degrees Celsius on CPU package. Whoa. Okay, well, that goes to show that this thing runs really hot. But I mean, considering that it's a 6-core CPU in such a thin package, I can understand why the CPU runs so hot. Also, if we check GPU-Z, our maximum temperatures while running that game, but it didn't really exceed all that. I mean, it didn't really exceed much more beyond than 76 degrees Celsius, which is a very safe temperature for GPU operation, because these NVIDIA GPUs generally throttle themselves at 84 degrees Celsius. So we were operating well within good performance parameters. The CPU thing is a bit scary, but we're sure that Lenovo knows what they're doing. So you've seen our performance in Monster Hunter World. You've seen what we had to say about build quality. You've heard our opinions on the screen, the hard drive, and you've heard very loudly our opinions on the CPU temperature and GPU temperature. So what do we actually think of the Lenovo Y530 Legion? Well, it's a very balanced laptop. You've got a great CPU, a middling graphics card that certainly will not turn any heads, but is perfect for this size and this price range. I mean, certainly there are other laptops of the price range which have 1060s, but they're mostly bulkier. They mostly have inferior battery lives or build quality, and you're paying a premium for what I think looks like a really good case of durability. And I'm liking the Type-C, I'm liking the PCIe SSD, even if we mentioned how the figures weren't that good. At least you have a 128 gig and a storage drive that's 1 terabyte. Overall, I would definitely recommend this laptop to someone who wants powerful gaming in a package that's easy to move around. Thanks for watching. I forgot to mention my name at the start of the video, but I'm Anton. You've just watched What's a Geek's video review of the Lenovo Y530 Legion gaming laptop. We hope that this video has been of use to you, helpful to you in some way, and if you've liked what you've seen, stay tuned for more.